Yeah, this is Peter Moore coming to you from Santa Barbara, California, and you're watching the Sega Guys.
Welcome, Sega fans, once again to the Sega sensational world of the Sega Guys. We have a very special treat for you today, but with me as always is James the Segaholic. How you doing, buddy?
I am absolutely fantastic, mate, as people will soon understand why.
Absolutely, because we are not alone. We have a true industry legend with us today. He's been the head of EA, Xbox, and of course, Sega of America. Most importantly, he's a man that helped solidify the Dreamcast as a legendary console and helped transform the gaming industry as we know it. It is none other than Peter Moore. So, Peter Moore, thank you so much for joining us. Sega legend, Xbox legend, amongst so many other things. It's a pleasure to have you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, yeah. I live in Santa Barbara, California. How can I not be doing well?
And with the weather and the temperatures we got here, it's insanely jealous.
Yeah,
I
hate to tell you, but it's probably Celsius 22 today, you know, the average January day.
There we go.
Makes you sick. I mean, Glasgow's what? I think we were lucky to see 4 or 5 degrees today, but that's why we're so pale. I've got filters on to try and make me look as if I've got kind of natural skin tone here, you know.
Need some makeup.
I don't have that department, Peter. Well, can you get my wife to try right enough?
Peter, of course, we're going to talk a bit of Sega today. So just wanted to say, you know, before you even joined Sega, you know, I read that your son had a Sega Saturn. So straight away, the industry must have known that you had incredible taste in consoles. So, but
yeah,
how did the move to Sega come about, especially after over a decade in sportswear?
Well, I had, you know, it was more than a decade. I was when I came to America, you know, playing and coaching football, but pretty quickly realized I needed a real job and got a job here in Southern California where I've ended up again, selling soccer shoes for Patrick. You guys are too young to remember Patrick's, but
we remember.
Yeah, and you know, I worked my way through the ranks at Patrick, and you know, Southern California sales rep in 1982, so 40 years ago. First time I ever came to Santa Barbara was to sell soccer shoes, and then sales manager, moved up to San Francisco, and then became president of the company. And that really got me into, you know, proper corporate work. And then I was recruited by Reebok to bring them into the world of global sports. Reebok in those days, and I'm talking 1992, so I'm talking 30 years ago, a very powerful competitor to Nike, but more of a lifestyle brand, probably as it still is. And they needed to globalize. And so my background already in soccer had caught their eye, and I spent, 8.5 years at Reebok in Boston, where, again, I progressed from director of soccer to vice president of men's sports, and then senior vice president of all global sports. So, but towards the end, and I'm talking late 90s, 98, things were getting tough. You know, the Nike machine had kicked in the mid 90s, and all of a sudden we were completely marginalized as a brand, and Nike was rolling over us. So it's time for me to move on a little bit. So got a call from my executive recruiter, a headhunter, and it's like, what do you know about video games? Nothing other than I bought my son Tyler a Sega Saturn a couple of years ago, and almost immediately, if I remember, you know, they'd stopped making new games for it. So I was a little bit miffed at that. And the recruiter said, well, you know, funny you should say that, but Sega's looking for somebody that can run their marketing in advance of a launch of a new console. And in those days, you know, it's still very much what I'll call boys in their bedrooms. You know, it was still very young. It was because the power of the machines and the type of content we could put through and the graphical resolutions weren't there yet to be able, where we all enjoy now. It was still very much a phase you went through, but as a teenager, you were consumed by video games. And then everything seemed a little juvenile as you got into your later teens and got a job or went to college or whatever. And obviously not the case anymore, but in those days that was the case. And so, but the idea, and the reason I say that, is that I was selling sneakers, as they're known here, and the idea being that if I could sell sneakers to teenage boys, and just in some instances girls, then I could certainly do the same with video games. So I kind of took a plunge, and I was over, what would I be? I'd be 43, 44 years of age and completely changed careers. Moved back to San Francisco Bay Area. And pretty quickly, within about 6 months of me joining, my boss, Bernie Stoller, left the company and I was put into the president role. And so, all of a sudden, there to launch the Dreamcast on 9/9/99. So I completely immersed myself in the world of video games in those first few months and got up to speed spent a lot of time going back between San Francisco and Tokyo and getting an understanding of the competitive environment, the capabilities of the machine, what drives the consumer, what they're looking for. And, by the time I'd only been on the job probably less than 8.5 months, and we launched the Dreamcast here in the United States to great critical acclaim, as you know.
Yes.
But, it was in the shadow of the impending new PlayStation coming through, and that all how it ended out, and we can talk about that. But yeah, that's how I got into the business, just through an executive recruiter, linking athletic shoes, sneakers, and video games, same core demographic, same user, and theoretically, the same advertising channels, the same style of advertising, and what have you.
No,
changed radically since, obviously.
Yes, but Dreamcast obviously kind of leading the way and kind of pioneering that. But Peter, you said there that whenever you joined in '98, and obviously you'd bought your son the Saturn kind of months before that. When you went into Sega, were you quite surprised that there was literally no Western kind of presence console-wise? Because Bernie had previously said to EGM that Saturn's not our future. That was before you joined. So you've in there now. You're part of that kind of infrastructure. Was it a bit kind of surreal that you're going in with a kind of a product to come, but with nothing in place at all?
Well, that was it. We weren't really selling anything at that point. Everything was focused on preparing for the Dreamcast, and Bernie did a tremendous job in getting third-party support, albeit 1, maybe 2 games, but getting the likes in those days of an Acclaim and a Midway, to be able, and of course the Japanese publishers that Sega of Japan had round up with the Capcoms and the Namcos and obviously Konami's. But we were completely and utterly focused because we knew this was our last shot. With what had happened with the Saturn, there was no way that the gamer, if the Dreamcast didn't land with a resounding thud and deliver the units that it needed to deliver, Sega as a hardware company was going to be done, was going to be toasted. There's no two ways. And we knew that very clearly because we knew that the PS2 was coming along, in March of 2000. Sony was doing everything they could to FUD us, placing fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the minds of the potential Dreamcast owner.
Yep.
Positioning it as a transitional platform and saying look, you can buy your Dreamcast, but you're going to buy a PlayStation when the new one comes along.
Yep.
The promise of the Emotion Engine and it's like playing Toy Story, and it sounds ridiculous now, but 20 odd years ago,
That's
the
right.
graphical power in that respect was going to be where it was all at. So, is our best last shot here to maintain our first party hardware and software positioning against a Sony and a Nintendo, and of course, Microsoft coming onto the scene shortly thereafter. So we knew our backs were against the wall.
Dan, you're on mute, mate.
Apologies. So just coming back to what you said before, Peter, about you've come in and you join the company, and then just several months later, your boss, Bernie Stoller, he leaves. Was there anything that you did different, or that you were determined to do to keep the momentum of the Dreamcast going till you get to launch?
Yeah, I think we needed what I recall doing. We're talking 24 years ago now. Is leveraging back on the Sega brand. I still thought that the Sega brand had great credentials with the current gamer at that time. The Genesis in this country had been massive, and we kind of lost our way a bit. But Sega had positioned itself as irreverent, had positioned itself well against Nintendo, all the way up to Congress, where they fought over M-rated games, and I thought that was a huge opportunity, and I love being the challenger brand. I love being in a position to take punches and not have to defend the top of the hill, but take the top of the hill. And so I did a lot of work in figuring out how we could reposition Sega to be able to try to wash away, if you will, all of the ill feeling of the Saturn, which was prevalent, to say the least, with the gaming community in the United States at that time. How we could bring back, you know, the irreverency, the Sega scream, which was part and parcel of the advertising, which we did, and, you know, work with the respective ad agencies, which was my job, to create content and advertising positioning that would see us as the kind of feisty upstart. But most importantly, of course, was the platform itself. And when I say platform, I don't mean just hardware. I mean the concept of having what I think is the best launch lineup that will ever be. It'll never be matched again.
And
the dream of online gaming, albeit dial-up, and in this country that was a 56K modem, board modem. And, you know, the utilization of great first-party content, obviously Sonic leading the way there. But the one thing that Sega of Japan had done well, and Bernie had done well in this country, was to get third-party support. But it was support that was like reticent. It was like, all right, here's a game, and I'm sure lots of, you know, dollars changed hands in support of the development costs of those games that preceded me. But it's like, we'll wait and see, because, you know, Sony's coming down the pike. You know, you sell enough units and it'll be worth us doing a Ready to Rumble if you're Midway, or a Soul Calibur, you know, all a Trick Style, you know, all of these games, Hydro Thunder that came along at launch. But the key was always going to be, all right, where's game number 2? Where's game number 3? And of course, you know, I think Sony, as I say, had done a great job in convincing the prime publishers of that time to turn their development guns with the dev kits that they provided for the new PlayStation console coming through. And it was going to be very difficult for us to be able to continue the momentum that we got at launch, which was immense here in the United States. If there wasn't going to be, here's the next 12, 18 months out at E3 of all of the games that are coming. And so heavy reliance very quickly on first party, the 9 studios back in Tokyo, in Haneda, to deliver content in the lack of, and let's not forget, EA didn't deliver a single game for the Dreamcast. So our focus was always going to be, let's get out of the blocks, let's hit our numbers, which we did. We were struggling with getting production. And from the perspective of getting through the second Christmas, which was going to be the key, how do we hit our numbers, hit our attach rate of games to the hardware, and how do we drive online as a business without it being just a cost center? Things like SegaNet coming along, and how do we do innovative things with online, which you couldn't do with offline consoles at that time. So those were the criteria we were after in the summer of '99 as we were thinking through the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you mentioned there as well about the kind of importance that you put on the Sega branding, because I always remember, and I've still got the issue upstairs of Edge, and it's one of my favourite issues. It's a beautiful burnt orange cover. And it's issue 60, and it was whenever the Dreamcast was unveiled at the New Challenge conference in May '98, and Edge made a big deal about it because the actual headline on the cover is "Sega is dead, long live the Dreamcast," and they made a very big point of pointing out that there was no Sega branding even on the unit they showed off. And the point they were making then was that, you know, this is going to be a brand like a PlayStation. It's not the Sony PlayStation, it's the PlayStation. This is going to be the Dreamcast. Were you involved in the kind of chats with Sega of Japan about, no, we need to get our name back on the front of that system?
Not only involved, I tell them it's got to be the Sega Dreamcast. I mean, you know, we worked with our packaging company. It's the Sega Dreamcast. I didn't think Dreamcast could stand alone. In those days, it was still the Sony PlayStation. You know, the standalone that PlayStation now has, an Xbox away from Microsoft. Now, and I didn't get much pushback. We added the Sega name in front of Dreamcast. So you look at the US packaging, you'll find pictures online. It's Sega Dreamcast. I still feel that despite the trip on the journey of that was the Sega Saturn, that the Sega brand, the positioning of being irreverent and speaking to a 15-year-old boy, let's call it out, was still relevant, was still there, and that we could leverage that. And our TV advertising in particular was mysterious, played a little bit on the technology element of its thinking, but also tied into the kind of, you know, feisty, upstarty challenger that always was and probably always will be in Sega. We needed to play on that. And as a marketer, I thought that was rich territory. I wasn't bound by a major corporation like a Sony or Microsoft to fit into something that I couldn't stretch the boundaries. And, you know, even later on, we did an ad with a cheeky little redheaded kid that, you know, PlayStation couldn't meet its production numbers.
That's right.
You know, and just like, and you know, and the guys at Sony, we all traded punches all the time. You know, at launch, we infamously infiltrated their golf tournament and had a guy running around in a Sonic suit and changed out the golf balls overnight with Sega logos and flew a plane overhead. I mean, this were the days of the console wars. This were the days when maybe you're appealing to a teenage sense of humor, but they really appreciated that the brands would go nose to nose with each other. And, you know, the console wars are real. And a lot of the lessons that I learned came out of my days at Reebok, where it's Reebok versus Nike in those days. You know, unfortunately, it's not anymore. But from the perspective of having brands go at it, that's good for the consumer because they've got to make their product better. You know, it's got to be price competitive, and they've got to like win you over because if they don't, the other guy's going to get you. And that makes great brands, and that makes great marketers, and the consumer benefits.
No, I mean that launch that you were talking about there, Peter, as well, $97,904,618.07. The biggest launch in entertainment history at that time. So there's actually a video on YouTube of you removing the orange papers, you know, to go through all of the numbers. So, I mean, obviously, you're incredibly proud of that launch. You know, we notice that you never miss the Dreamcast anniversary on Twitter. You know, it's
totally.
Dan and I were going through that, and I'm like, look, he never misses it. He's got his console and his launch team kind of memorabilia there. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, look, I remember in those days you're hitting the road and you're selling to retailers. And, you know, it was disc based. It was way before, obviously. You know, dial-up modems are not going to deliver games in any kind of efficiency, you know. And so I remember going up to see Hollywood Video, which sounds strange, but that's up in Portland, Oregon, with my senior vice president of sales, Chris Gilbert, who's still in the video game industry to this day, and being at PDX Portland Airport, about to fly back down to SFO, to San Francisco, and sat there and we had a beer and you know, we got good response from Hollywood Video. They went up against, believe it or not, Blockbuster. This is who we were selling to. And I said, I wonder what the biggest retail number in entertainment sales history ever was. And I can see myself saying this to Chris. And I said, I bet it's like a Star Wars something or whatever. And because we were also comparing ourselves to you know, first night at box office or first 24 hours at box office. So it became the biggest entertainment launch. And it wasn't a huge number that I thought it was. And though it may have been 50, 60 million, I said, I bet we can blow that apart. Let's focus on that as regards, that's our target, that's our North Star. And that's what that's what our positioning is going to be is this is going to be the biggest entertainment launch in retail history in the US anyway, and probably in the world. That will then lift video games because it will show the power of games, which we still had to work hard in those days and convincing people this was not just, you know, a phase people went through for a couple of years. It was a meaningful entertainment medium that was going to last forever. And yeah, we had an event that night on the night of 9/9. That actually it was the next night, I believe, because I was in New York for the VMAs for 9/9. and then flew back. And we had, once we collected all the data the next night on 9/10, on September 10th, we unfurled it. That was South of Market in San Francisco, and got everybody together, that had worked so hard on getting us to where we're at and selling every single unit. And my sales team had, figured out what the numbers were based on, in those days you had to call the retailer, and the retailer would tell you what they'd sold through, and you did the math. But we knew how many units we shipped in. We knew they're all gone. We knew that the retailers would know how many games were sold through, not sold in, sold through. And we extrapolated a number from that. And to your point, we just were shy of 100 million.
Unbelievable.
It's absolutely incredible when you think about, especially in the context of the time back then. So, as you say, Peter, what video games were perceived as, for it to blow that record, as you say, the next closest, biggest entertainment release out of the water, it's an outstanding achievement, not just for Sega, but for video games in general. It's amazing.
It was important for the industry because I think that, it was that moment where online was starting to become interesting, but nothing was going to be taking advantage better of online connection than games, because the social element of games was going to elevate it from you and your mate on the couch, of you and your mate down the road, he doesn't need to come to your house anymore, to you against hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And there was no other entertainment medium that was going to utilize the internet at that time anyway. Maybe movies now where streaming is becoming the way that we consume them, but at that time, bringing people together to play, to compete, was going to be very much hours in video games to grasp or lose. You still had to go to the cinema physically to watch a movie. Movies were still, 30 gigabytes or whatever they were. Music, long time before the iPhone and the iPod were coming, and figuring out, in the days of Napster and everything there, of how it all worked. But games and coming together and playing, I mean, it was amazing what the developers were able to do with that dial-up modem. Of course, the broadband adapter came a little bit further on with Quake 3 and Counter-Strike, if I recall, maybe Doom. But, it was incredible what our development studios were able to do.
It really was, when you consider that we had a 26.6K modem over here as well.
So I'm just laughing as well because, Peter's talking about Napster, but we're old enough to remember getting the tape recorder, putting the top 40 on the radio and having it sitting there recording your songs. So,
I mean,
we've come a long way.
These kids today,
you're born, guys. That's the thing,
Yeah, but that's it. I mean, you can track the development of how we consume content, just content in general terms from those days. And look, I go back and I revisited in the last few years vinyl. I'm looking at my record player, everything, buy vinyl again. And I don't know if you saw, certainly here in the US, vinyl outsold CDs last year.
Really?
I heard that.
So you've got that, and so I think that ultimately, and we were still very much stuck in the world of physical media in those days, and the GD-ROM, which was the format we used for the Dreamcast, I think was 640 megs, and it was huge, and we were able to get great games on that, and now today that hardly gives you the audio soundtrack of the game, but we were able to put great games on that, and started to mess around with a little bit of how you could bug fix and update and maybe put some content up there. It wasn't easy through dial-up. It was still very much, here's the game, play the game, put it on the shelf, give it to your little brother, go trade it in a GameStop, do whatever. But once you played the game, there's nothing else coming. Very different to where we are today.
Absolutely. But, the Dreamcast has this amazing launch of all these innovations, especially the online component. And then the PS2 comes out, in May 2000, and eclipses it, basically seemingly just on PlayStation branding and hype alone. You can't just be us Sega fans that kind of looked at that PlayStation launch lineup and just thought, is that all it is? I mean, Peter, you must, you've already mentioned fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Do you agree that it probably is more of a case that, Sony fudded
very much so,
rather than anything else?
I think they footed us well. I've always somewhat congratulated them on what they did. They placed that fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the minds of the gamers. We also, but to, you know, we have to take the blame, if you will, that we couldn't project out at E3s. Certainly, 2000 E3, you know, we had a great showing, great booth and whatever, but it was very difficult to show, here's the next, you know, 2 years of games that are coming down the pike. And because we just didn't have that. Now, look, we had tremendous first-party support, 9 studios, you know, that were cranking out great content. But there were, and I was spending a lot of time supporting Sega of Japan in seeing Japanese publishers when I would go over on a very regular basis to Tokyo. But, you know, it just, you know, not having EA was challenging. My job as well in the US, where it was seen that if you're a first party, you better have your own sports brand. And so we spent a lot of time, because we didn't have Madden or FIFA or anything like that. We spent a lot of time building out Sega Sports 2K, which is what it was, and building out and doing all the licensing with the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, tennis, golf, I mean, everything. And that was all done within my group of building out that sports brand and the 2K brand. And ironically, of course, went over to Take-Two. But from the perspective of what we were able to do, and that was absolutely critical. We didn't have sports. And sports gave us a great platform for showing off the power of the hardware. In particular, the NFL and the NBA games. And I remember the first real meaningful game we got to run online to show was NBA 2K. May have been 2K1, but NBA 2K, Sega Sports NBA 2K, with Allen Iverson on the cover. And it was just amazing, you know, at 30 frames a second, relatively lag-free on a 33K board modem that we were able to show these games. And so we spent a tremendous amount of time evangelizing and advocating and trying incredibly hard. But, you know, towards the end, it was clear that we just weren't going to get over the hump in that Christmas of 2000. You know, unfortunately, I think I went over in January of 2001 to Haneda and presented our numbers. Japan had already kind of like, the writing was on the wall there, and Europe was kind of hanging on, but was told, all right, you know, it's not gonna, we're not going to be able to sustain producing hardware that's losing money because the attach rate isn't there. Because, you know, I think we were selling at $199 and probably costing closer to $250, $260. You need software attach rates, and it just wasn't there. So, you know, Irimajiri-san and Sato-san, you know, the guys in charge there said, you know, we're going to shut it down and we're going to move to third party. And you're going to tell the world. So, no
pressure.
Well, it's just, you know, it needed to be done. I often get blamed for killing the Dreamcast. That still sits around. No, didn't do that. I did an interview where it said I had to make the call, meaning the telephone call, and people took that as the decision. So it's one of the things I smile at when I still see stuff that goes on. So yeah, we January 31st, I organized a conference call, hundreds of people on the call, media, industry colleagues, and announced that Sega was getting out of the hardware business. Unfortunately, you know, large reduction in force all around the world, and we were going to move to be a third party. And so, you know, the following week, tail between legs, I'm calling Sony and Nintendo for dev kits to start putting Sega content on their platforms.
I mean, that's the thing as well, Peter. It's like, obviously I was in my kind of early 20s now the Dreamcast came out. Dan, you're not far behind me. And it was actually quite annoying because even retailers seem to be getting in on this whole, like the Dreamcast was like a toy, but you know, PlayStation 2 has a DVD player. It's the mature man's games console. And it was, whenever I bought my PlayStation 2, I managed to get a hold of one at launch. And if I remember, I had Tekken Tag, Ridge Racer 5, and FIFA 2001 as my bundle. And I got it home, my Japanese Dreamcast that I'd imported the year before sitting there. And and I fired up Ridge Racer 5, and I was appalled by the jaggies on this. I felt as if my Dreamcast was laughing at me for believing the hype. But, you know, I think Sony had said, you mentioned the Toy Story graphics in real time. I'm sure they also at one point said that the pod racing scene from episode 1, The Phantom Menace, the Emotion Engine can do that for you in real time. And you're like, whenever the actual unit hit, you actually realise people were being conned. The Dreamcast, for at least, I would say, 12 to 14 months, matched, if not eclipsed, anything that the PlayStation 2 put out. It was, so if it was galling for us, you know, as fans of the system, fans of the company, to see that, you guys who have put everything into launching this must have been pulling your hair out.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I recall, and again, going back into the depths of my memory banks here, they had a real issue with anti-aliasing at launch, and it just, you know, that'll just give you the jaggies all day long. Sony has a track record. Look, I love them all, right? And particularly working at EA, you know, for 10 years, far be it from me to criticize Sony. But, you know, they did it there, and it was all based on, a little bit on FUD, but also some false promises, a little bit, to get them over the hump. They leveraged their brand brilliantly. They had a lot more money than Sega of Japan to be able to drive that forward. And it was getting already to where the PlayStation name was a standalone. For me, if I can fast forward 5 years, when launching the Xbox 360, it was never more prevalent at E3, when in Japan they're already showing the Bouncer and Kessen, if you remember those games.
Yeah,
with,
I do, yep.
You know, like, but CGI cutscenes, you know, and somewhat pretending that they were, you know, in-game, in-engine gameplay. And then, of course, I'll never forget Killzone at that E3, which, you know, was like a movie. But then they rely on the fact when they actually, you know, I don't know, a year later ship the console, that you forget what you saw. I didn't, you know, and so,
a lot of us didn't.
No, you know, and if I recall, they had done, you know, they found a CGI company up in Scotland to do that. I'd have to go back and look. Yeah, I mean, it's 16, 17 years, but I can remember that E3 like it was yesterday. We were showing, you know, Halo and everything, Halo 2, you know, and showing in-game, in-engine. And I insisted that this was all in-engine. And we were launching with Epic, if you will, the Unreal Engine 3 at that time with Gears of War.
Yeah.
What a game. What a game.
Yeah, but, you know, had the guts to put it live, you know, on the stage at E3. And in fact, it froze. You know, we had a Ghost Rider in the background, Blake Fisher, who worked for us at Xbox, and you know, the Ghost Rider plays along so that if something, because you're at best it was probably early beta that you're playing with Marcus Phoenix and it froze, and but you wouldn't. Well, yeah, if you were in the theater, you would have seen a little blip, but straight away changed the input because the original had frozen. But the Ghost Rider, Blake was playing along every moment, so that you flipped inputs when a particular build, which was always going to be unstable, would freeze, so that you know, for the most part, you could continue on to the end of the demo. And yeah, and you maybe didn't. I don't think we hid that it froze, but for enjoyment of the, you know, kind of people in the theater, and by then everything was being streamed at home as well, so you could watch it at home. But yeah. That's the nature of the business. I mean, you just fake it till you make it, from the perspective of convincing people, which is why, you know, the infamous Gears, not infamous, famous Gears of War commercial, you know, Mad World with the Gary Chu version. You know, and I hate to, I'm jumping to Xbox, and I apologize.
Oh, we're going to go there anyway. We're going to go there anyway, Peter. That's fine.
Yeah, but it was. To the credit was McCann Erickson, our agency, that came in, and I always remember, you know, up in Seattle there, and walked in, and it was a little awkward. Got in a conference room, they switched all the lights out, just tad awkward, like 10 guys there in a dark room, and they played that Mad World, the Gary Jewell version, and said, now imagine Gears of War, poignant Gears of War, with Marcus being, you know, set to this, albeit we won't be able to pull something from the game. The game is too frenetic, too violent, and yet the music is too poignant. So we created what you eventually saw, and at first it was going to be, and I think it was Digital Domain that did it, that the guys who worked on it, interestingly, if you've seen Top Gun, the latest Top Gun, the director is the guy that is the same guy that worked on Gears of War for us.
Really? There you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, but we did that, and I think video game advertising, certainly that long form advertising, changed forever then. It wasn't all heavy metal and explosions anymore. There was a sense of maturity and storytelling and the emotions that we had as gamers that were personal at that time, that advertisers never dared to like put on the screen because they were told, here's the formula. Shit's got to blow up. People are going to die. AC/DC, Metallica, Def Leppard, that's who it's got to be. And that's what works for this consumer. And we thought, no, we're gonna do something different. Anyway, and so that was the story of Gears of War then.
Phenomenal.
Fantastic. I mean, just segueing from Sega to Xbox now, obviously when the Dreamcast was discontinued, in Dean Takahashi's book, Open the Xbox, there was talk of Microsoft buying Sega, maybe even the Xbox being backwards compatible with the Dreamcast. Were you involved with any of those discussions at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was... Sure, people, at Microsoft, as they've shown, not afraid of, spilling the cash on things. But in those days, not necessarily in the world of video games. Today, as we know, I mean, potentially the company's biggest acquisition ever, if it ever goes through.
It's getting very messy.
Yeah, but I think that ultimately, you see, online was important to Microsoft, very important. The belief that Bill definitely had. He wasn't going to get into just a war with the Japanese, if you will, on who can make the best games and who can, whose CPU, GPU, is going to work the best, look the best. He truly believed that getting online was going to be the key of amassing millions of people, as he'd already done with Windows. And he also believed it was the key to getting the console sat next to the television in the living room rather than in Joey's bedroom, where it had previously been for probably 15 years. And to be fair, the capabilities of the Xbox were a little bit more than games. Music was a big deal. Being able to do, we did things like photo albums and stuff that you could do, but most importantly, Xbox Live. And that was going to be the key to, if you will, consolidating the gamer base, not only saying we've got 2 million units sold to people we actually don't know because it went through Best Buy or Walmart or Target. No, we're going to have 2 million people we know. And we're going to be able to give them a great gaming experience. And we're also going to be able, quite frankly, to commercialize them, if you will, and monetize them and find ways to engage with them that they're simply going to spend more money. And online was always going to be the key to that. So the Dreamcast, which, passed the baton, if you will, of online to Xbox, what became the Xbox 360, codenamed Xenon for the longest time. And people like Robbie Bach, George Peckham, head of third party, had John Smith. Remember, the Dreamcast had a Microsoft logo on the back. Yeah. Because it was Windows CE.
Yep.
It had more Microsoft logos than the Xbox 360 did. Because the complete opposite of Sega Dreamcast is, I said, we're not putting the Microsoft logo. This is going to be the Xbox. And I think that thread of online was a common thread. I used to go after Sony and certainly Nintendo that just didn't know how to do online in those days. They just remember they charged for it. We charged for it, and the PlayStation Network in those days was free. But the experience that we at Xbox were delivering was worth your $5 a month by far. And we were not afraid of building out something on the back of revenue that was coming in from gamers to enhance that gaming experience. So it truly became hardware, software, and services, and it truly became what we all take for granted now is this seamless experience that has no beginning and end, and you can talk to anybody and engage with anybody and buy all kinds of things should you wish, online because of the internet.
Yeah, I mean the original Xbox is kind of, you know, dubbed the Dreamcast 2. And one thing I've always wondered, Peter, is that all those games like your Sega GT, Jet Set Radio Future, Gun Valkyrie, Crazy Taxi 3, you know, Virtua Fighter 4, given the kind of short kind of turnaround between Dreamcast being discontinued and then the original Xbox kind of coming out and then the games going to PlayStation 2, were those games at any point Dreamcast games? Did you ever go to Japan and see these games in development for Dreamcast, or were they always kind of maybe, no, they just went to Xbox? I've always wondered, you know, were these games ever going to be Dreamcast games and we were denied them because of the discontinuation?
What you have to remember is so many, you know, the studios were called AM2, AM3, amusement machine. Yeah. So the roots of Sega in Haneda is, and was for the longest time after the Dreamcast, you know, floated off into the distance, was still creating great content for physical arcade machines.
Yep.
And that always gave Sega, I always thought, a legs up, because they created content that was instantly fun. Instantly, like you're scrambling for your quarter or your 100 yen or whatever, your 50p. And because you had to deliver content that would make you continue to want to play after 90 seconds or 2 minutes. And I think that the Naomi board, the motherboard, was this consistent board that was very fungible, that certainly flipped easily to the Dreamcast. But having it on the Xbox wasn't a big deal. Did I ever see? I think the writing was on the wall. But for the most part, most of those studios were developing, you know, their shorter form content for the arcade machine still. Right. Knowing full well, Crazy Taxi, great example. Crazy Taxi was an arcade game, right? Yep. Now it really caught the imagination as a great game, and then it became bigger. But the original Crazy Taxi on the Naomi board was very much focused on, actually, if you played it, you know, like, all right, let's get to Pizza Express, let's get to Kentucky Fried Chicken, and let's, you know, make sure we deliver our passengers, and bang, you're putting money in from the get-go.
So speaking of those studios, you famously recalled a story where someone called you that guy who gave Shenmue away to Xbox, or something less pleasant, I believe he said to you. But obviously the strategy of bringing some of these titles to Xbox was extremely successful. Did the teams have Xbox in mind when they were developing these, or was it on a case-by-case basis? Did these areas approach you? How did it all manifest?
To the credit of Microsoft and the Xbox team, when things were going downhill, Robbie Bach, the people I mentioned, George Peckham, Blake Fisher, John Smith on the CE side, all reached out and said, how can we help? How can we look? And I'm sure it's selfish, like, we like that content and we don't have a ton of first party right now, but it was very much, how can we help you, because we believe in online gaming and you've shown us the way, albeit through dial-up, in how to do it. And of course, you know, they wanted a leg up on any relationship that Sony or Nintendo had. And then the competitive dynamic worked in their favor, because Sega, Sony, and Nintendo have been trading punches for decades. And, you know, Microsoft have been not only supportive, but the freaking operating system for the Dreamcast was you know, Windows CE. So there was a natural relationship there. Bill would go over to Japan, a big market for Microsoft, and spend some time over there. Went to TGS and you know, worked with Sega Japan on appearances, and you know, he and I think he saw an opportunity, bluntly, as did all of the Xbox team, to pick up where Sega had left. And I always say the baton was passed. Yeah. Maybe as Sega was like stumbling to the floor as they were doing it, but the baton was passed. The lessons were learned. The path was shown. The journey had just begun on online gaming. But, you know, every journey, you know, begins with the first step. And, you know, unfortunately, it's the old expression, you know, the pioneers get the arrows, the settlers get the homes or the land, you know, and plenty of arrows came Sega's way. So from that perspective, I I think it was pretty natural and opportunistic for the folks at Microsoft to reach out and say, you know, how can we help? What can we do? Here's some dev kits. You know, come on in when you get a chance. We'll give you a little under the hood look at what we're planning for a couple of years from now. And we believe in online. And by the way, not dial-up. We believe in broadband. And our next console is going to be broadband only. And this is at a time when 80% of the world's still connecting via dial-up. But said, no, you know, we're going to future-proof this piece of hardware. And, you know, if you're in the world of dial-up, well, maybe Xbox 360 isn't for you. You know, and so that was positioning we took. And then, you know, very fortunately in those 2-3 years, you know, broadband was becoming ubiquitous. Cat 5, you know, everything was being, certainly in this country, cables were, you know, being run to everybody's home, and we were all able to get broadband. But you add high def onto that as well. Yeah. And, you know, the Xbox 360 was the first kind of high def machine before televisions being rolled out that were reasonably priced and generally available. And you know, I always remember the folks at Best Buy saying, we need some Xbox 360 consoles in the TV section to show what high def content looks like.
Yeah,
we want to show off at least 720p, if not 1080p and 1080i, and you know, there wasn't enough content other than video games. Your Gears of War was a little tricky in the TV section, but games like Cameo, you know, you could gorgeous, and I always remember Best Buy saying, yeah, give us Cameo. It's you know, family friendly, beautifully rendered, and shows off, you know, high def. And yeah, sure, if we sell a console, that's great, but we're about selling televisions.
Yeah,
and this is where it's at.
I remember that E3 as well. Whenever you launched the 360, it was yourself, Jay Allard, and Robbie Back that were on stage. And I remember the slide, you actually stood in front of it, and it was like you announced that every Xbox 360 game will be HD ready. And that, back in 2005, that was a huge deal. You know, what you were going from to what you were about to witness, it was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to... The thing I learned, particularly going to Microsoft, is that, you know, you're working today, but you're planning for 3 years down the road, and then you have to be a futurist. And thank goodness, you know, we had some, you know, in particular, people like Jay Allard. This is what, you know, 2009 is going to look like, and we got to, our console better last for 5-6 years, and we better be ready. You know, things like the hard drive, obviously. The idea of having a detachable hard drive was brilliant, because then it's like, it starts off. Well, if you start off, I would think it was 2 gigabytes if you had the hard drive on there.
Funny,
you know, and then by the time I think it was done and dusted, you had a terabyte hard drive that, you know. But it future-proofed the path, the journey of that console, and allowed it to have a longer tail probably than it didn't. Concurrently, you know, broadband speeds getting better, getting cheaper, being ubiquitous in homes all around the world. And then developers learning to, you know, make these games and knowing full well that, yeah, if you're doing a gorgeously rendered 1080p game with a massive soundtrack, you better have a hard drive, you know. And our biggest issue, I always remember, was hard drive management in the early days. Is like, what do I delete to make room for this, you know? And so these were all, and then the, you know, the Blu-ray battles, which we just had fun with HD DVD. I mean, we just wanted to slow down Blu-ray as best we could, and so bizarrely we got behind HD DVD. Had a HD DVD player that was like
I had that.
Xbox, and got Peter Jackson behind it, and you know, with King Kong and a few other, and all it did was slow everything down. You know, it was my one opportunity to FUD Sony.
It took you long enough, Peter, but you got your own back on them a wee bit.
Yeah, I mean, and then we had a guy who's still a good friend, Albert Pinello, you know, and Albert, just go mess with him. Just like slow it down, go work. I think it was Toshiba that was our partner in this, and it just, everything was like, if we can delay this a year, this, you know, you've got to have a PlayStation, whatever it was, 3 by then to run Blu-ray, which will be the ubiquitous format. Look, I think there's no doubt in our minds that ultimately that was going to end up.
Yeah.
But it's like getting into the ring and think, I'm going to go 15 rounds. Probably going to lose at the end, but I'm going to slug it out for 15 rounds, slow things down. And we slowed it down to where we probably sold several million extra units of Xbox 360 without Blu-ray being the ubiquitous format for consuming physical media content.
It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, there was also the belief that eventually Blu-ray would have a limited time span. This was, I remember Bill Gates, this is that broadband speeds, maybe fiber to the home, all these things would come where physical media goes away, so Blu-ray didn't become a player. Now, it became ubiquitous and they sold probably billions of discs, but we slowed them down to where the Xbox 60 became supremely successful. Red Rings of Death notwithstanding.
I don't like to talk about them because I'm always of the impression and the opinion, if it wasn't for the RROD, I think 360 would have buried PS3 completely. And not kind of try to sound like kind of fanboyish, but I love the 360, you know, Gears of War, the Mad World trailer, everything about that. It's just, it's planted in there. It's part of kind of gaming heritage that we've got. But I just think if it wasn't for that, then I really think Sony, given the E3 they had, the $600, the Ridge Racer stuff and all that, 360 would just have completely crushed it that generation. And the fact that it finished kind of more or less level with PS3, despite that, is testament to the work that you guys done.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you look at that as the golden era that you know, I think when the dust settled, I think, you believe the numbers or not, but I think both sold somewhere in the region of about 120 to 130 million units sold through. So you got 250 million video game consoles selling through that were probably attach rate of 10 to 15 games. And so that's when I think the explosion of what gaming was about. It became mainstream. It became meaningful not just to you know, the GameStops and HMV or Virgin in the UK or whatever, but everybody wanted to be a part of that. And then you had some of the biggest intellectual property in the world clamoring, you know, the Lord of the Rings, the Harry Potters, obviously all the sports leagues. Everybody wanted in on this, not only for money, but to be able to get to an audience that they couldn't get to ordinarily, which was kind of millennials then and certainly Gen Z now.
Superb.
But Peter, I don't think we've got too much time left, so we've got a couple of last questions for you. So I think the first one, and this is one that James is very keen to know the answer on. Obviously, we've talked about the portfolio that Sega had and certain games. Do you know what happened with Virtua Fighter 4? Why was there never an Xbox port? Because
how did Sony get that? You know, did you just come in and just we'll just take the crown jewel and you can have the rest? I've always wondered that.
Was that you, Suzuki? I'm trying to remember.
It was, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer. You know, when I moved to you know, I was up in Seattle by 2003 in the spring and focused on other things. So whilst I, you know, still stayed in contact with everybody, whatever transpired afterwards, I was not ever going back to Haneda, that's for sure. So I lost track of all the dirt, the political infighting, everything that was going on back there. So I have no idea. But if I recall, that was Yu Suzuki. But at the same time, complete focus on Shenmue, my assumption is, you know, and so that Virtua Fighter, great series, but, you know, go somewhere else with it. I think the focus was Shenmue.
Absolutely. The one thing that's always been apparent is just your passion for the industry. It's come across, you know, as we've been speaking to, but it's been obvious for the 20 years that we've seen you, you know, from the Dreamcast days all the way through to, you know, the present day and the here and now. But what is, I mean, even Halo 2 tattoo and all of that, you know, what is it that you're most proud of? Obviously, you've got a fantastic contribution to video games, to the industry and the hobby in general. What are you most proud of? Yeah,
I think that when you think about, you know, by the time it was done and dusted, it's been 20 years of my career, you know, thereabouts of being involved there. And I was very fortunate to join, you know, at the wrong time for Reebok, the right time for me. It's one of those things you look back on your career and you go, if this hadn't happened, or you know, you turn left there, or you said no to that recruit or whatever. The safe bet for me would have been to stay in athletic shoes, but there was something about online when it was mentioned to me by the recruiter that they're going to do online that really piqued my interest. I thought, man, that feels like this could take this away from just being a little boy's thing to being something that could be massive going forward here. And so I'd like to think that in my days, certainly with Sega and fighting the good fight for the Dreamcast and online gaming and trading punches with Sony and then, of course, you know, going to Xbox, which was amazing for me, and really helping lead an incredible team that we were building on the fly there in Seattle. To, as I said, you know, with the PlayStation 3 coming along at the same time, if you will, revolutionize our industry from one of somewhat niche and narrow, and I don't mean to diminish where it was, because I'm talking 15, 16 years ago, but exploding them. And whether people like it or not, your console was more than just playing games, and it was a social device. It was a way to communicate with millions of people, of like-minded individuals, and it was driving massive business for companies, both inside the industry as well as those at the retail end. And you know, you had the Best Buys, you know, some parts staying in business for a while there because of their gaming. They were very focused on gaming and building that out. But you know, I was part of the industry, and I was very blessed to see it from its roots, if you will. Because if we hadn't embraced it online as an industry, you know, we'd be an alarm clock at this point. You know, just not, and if games were still offline, and I remember, you know, thumping my chest and telling everything, you know, 10 years ago, games are going to be online, and gamers didn't like it. Oh, I want my offline experience. No, games are, whether you like it or not, games are online, and every game in the future is going to have an online component that will connect you. Oh, that's Big Brother, you know, and so you think of all of these things, and to make change, you know, the old, if you're going to make an omelet, you've got to break a few eggs, and it's what we believed in. And so I was very fortunate to be involved with 3 great companies at the time, and, you know, being the front man more than anything else. God forbid, you know, didn't write any code, and, you know, I was very, very fortunate, in particular, to be at EA and see, which is a whole different conversation, and how the embracing of digital, you know, as controversial as EA sometimes is, which always baffles me. But I was a very, very fortunate individual to come in there as president of EA Sports, and then chief operating officer, and really be at the forefront of transforming the way that we think about consuming games now. Whether you liked it or not, it was like, you're going to download the games. These games are going to last forever. You're going to buy things to, you know, enhance your gaming experience or not. But, you know, and games like FIFA have changed the world. No doubt in my mind. Games like FIFA have changed the world, and great pride in that one as regards not only driving billions of dollars for the industry and for football leagues around the world, Premier League and everybody else we had deals with, but maintaining back end of millennials and all Gen Zs a love of football and a deep love of football. You know, I know it's only a game, but you go talk to a hardcore FIFA player or EA Sports FC, they're going to tell you who should be playing in midfield for Lithuania at the Euro and what they're worth in foot. So.
Oh, fantastic stuff. Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was the legendary Peter Moore. Hope all of our viewers enjoyed the show, all of our listeners too. Please get in touch, either through the YouTube comments below. You can reach out to us on the Radio Sega Discord or on Twitter. You can catch me at Swooper_D. You can catch James at the Segaholic. You can catch the account at SEGAGuys. But until next time, stay retro, stay Sega, and we will see you on the Sega side.
Sega!